let's talk about brain training. We've discussed that your brain has something called neurons. These little cells right here. It's a cell that connects to other neurons or other cells in our brain. These cells are connected to each other by something called synapses. So every time you learn something new, your brain creates more synapses or these connections. So every time you learn, these connections are being created. That's the first step. Next, we want to strengthen these connections because over time, if we don't use these synapses, these connections disappear because memories sometimes fade, right? What you learn one day, you might forget another day if you don't use it. So you need to strengthen those connections so that these connections last a long time, so that these connections are strong. That's why we repeat things when we learn. Usually, the first time we do something, we don't learn it. We have to do it over and over and over. And we're going to get to that later on in the course. Simply put, if you forget something, it means that those connections aren't strong enough. The neuron connection, the synapses, are gone. They're not strong enough. So our brain is like a muscle. At any moment, it's growing or deteriorating. Your brain is never in just the same state. And when you're not exercising your mind actually atrophies and actually loses neurons. But when we use our brain, when we learn new things, neurons become linked together through repeated use. So you need to practice to create these strong connections. Practice creates stronger and stronger connections, and we learned that diffuse mode has a chance to build these strong connections, not just the focus mode. And that's why we don't do late night studying or we make sure that we sleep. We train our brain, we form these new neural connections by exercising it, and we exercise it by repeating what we learned. And when we start thinking of the brain as a muscle, something that you have to train, something that either is being atrophied or something that is growing, we start to realize that if we don't use it, we're going to lose it. Now, finally, when it comes to brain training, there's actually one other thing that's super important. And this is actually quite a new, recent discovery. We used to think that when we're born, we have all the neurons at birth. That is, we don't create new neurons in our brain. It's just neurons connect with different neurons, and that was it. And neurons die if we don't use them. This new study found that in a few places, like the hippocampus, which is right around here in our brain, and it's used for memories, new neurons are actually created every day. And since new neurons are created every day when we're learning new things will keep them around. How cool is that? But then there's one other thing when it comes to brain training that is super important, and that is actual physical exercise. Because we learned that our brain is a constant state of movement, either growing or declining, just like our muscles in our body. But physical exercise, that is going for a run, going for a jog, lifting weights, playing sports, actually help with our brain because it allows us to be in that diffuse mode, to think about other things, to relax our brain. And that actually in turn helps our brain as well. So amongst just learning, also physical exercise, even if you're not thinking about anything, even if you're just daydreaming, is actually good for the brain. The key here is that we just need to use our brain. So now that we know how to train our brain, let's uncover some other topics that can help us with this brain training.